Welcome to DC Statehood Today, the show that keeps you informed on the latest DC statehood issues. My name is Denisha Richard. You can watch us online at dctv.org or dc51.us. You can also follow us on Twitter at DC51Today. The new Columbia Admission Act in the House, or H.R. 317, has three new co-sponsors. Congresswoman Lofgren, Congresswoman Rice, and Congressman Rupersberger are the new sponsors in the House supporting statehood for the District of Columbia. This brings the total number of co-sponsors for H.R. 317 to 125. The Senate equivalent, Bill S-1688, has 18 co-sponsors. Both bills seek to make the District of Columbia the 51st state in the Union. And earlier this year, D.C. Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton introduced a new bill in Congress, H.R. 552, or the District of Columbia Budget Autonomy Act of 2015. The bill calls for amending the District of Columbia Home Rule Act and eliminate all federally imposed mandates over the local budget process and financial management of the District of Columbia. We will continue to monitor the progress of this bill. Recently, at-large council member Anita Bonds, along with at-large council member Vincent Orange, introduced a D.C. statehood resolution at the National Conference of State Legislators. The resolution had enough votes to pass in the Judiciary Subcommittee, but the result was reversed when it was discovered that the vote count was inaccurate, as two states that supported the resolution had left the meeting during the final vote tally. During its 45th Legislative Conference in Washington, D.C., the Black Congressional Caucus held a D.C. statehood panel. The panel, hosted and moderated by D.C. Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, was held at the Washington Convention Center. The panelists included D.C. Councilmember David Grosso, U.S. Shadow Representative Franklin Garcia, the chair of the Cannabis Campaign, Adam Ettinger, and restaurant owner Khalid Pitts. D.C. Councilmember David Grosso introduced the Local Resident Voting Rights Act of 2015. This bill would allow D.C. non-U.S. residents, permanent residents, also known as green card holders, to vote in local elections in the district. If the bill is passed by the D.C. City Council, some fear that the U.S. Congress could once again meddle into D.C. local law affairs and try to prevent enforcement of the law. We'll keep you posted on the developments of the bill. During the summer, a new group was formed called Disrupt DC. The activist group went to Ocean City, Maryland, and held a beach party for DC statehood. The group, led by Daniel Lewis, held a civil activity on the city's boardwalk, where they waved DC flags with the slogan, "No taxation without representation," and handed out pro-statehood flyers to beachgoers. In our next segment, we will hear more about this group, but first, DC Senator Michael D. Brown will talk about what he is doing to bring statehood to the nation's capital.
Hello, and welcome to the DC Statehood Today show. I am your host today, Theodora Brown, and joining me is Senator Michael D. Brown, who is the shadow senator for the District of Columbia. Welcome, Senator Brown.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful to have you here. So I just want to start off asking you, how did you get involved in politics?
Well, you know, it's funny. I studied political science when I was in college, and I got out of college and was looking for a job, and I went to work for Jimmy Carter, helping him in his re-election campaign. We weren't very successful with that, but that led me to a job at the Democratic National Committee, where I was for 4 years. Ended up being the director of their direct mail programs, and I started a consulting firm after that, after leaving that. And for 25 years, I represented political campaigns and nonprofit groups doing direct mail. So one day I just decided to run for public office. I thought, you know, 35 years in politics, I should try to get elected to something.
And so, what did you run for first? What was your first office?
Well, the first office I ran for was ANC Commissioner. And that's very often the first office that people run for in the District of Columbia. It's a really tough job. But we needed a commissioner in our neighborhood. There was a vacancy. So I ran and got elected, and I did that for one term. And then I went back to running my business. You know, that was something I did on the side. I ran my business. So the first time I ran for citywide office, I ran for this office.
And so how long ago was that? And
that was in 2006.
Okay.
So I've been doing this about 9 years.
Okay, and so what has the work? What is the work that you've done in the last 9 years for DC Statehood?
Well, you know, we've done a lot of things. We've lobbied Congress. I think that the most progress we've made, the one thing that we've really accomplished, is when I started this job, everybody talked about voting rights. There was legislation in the House of Representatives and in the Senate to give the district one vote. It was based on the Missouri Compromise, and they were going to give Utah a vote and DC a vote. That failed. And we were able to change the conversation, I think, from one of a single vote to statehood. And I think that's what we've accomplished. But some of the things I've done is, you know, I have a weekly radio talk show that I've had for 2.5 years.
And tell us some more about that radio talk show.
Well, we started, we found out that we could do an internet talk show and that we could afford to do it. It was relatively inexpensive. We knew that this was a subject that people didn't know about. There was a survey done in the early, like 2005, that showed that 80% of the people in America didn't know that we didn't have the same rights as everybody else. So we thought we need to get the word out, and we started a talk show with I started it with a very old political friend of mine who we worked together for Carter, as a matter of fact, Kathleen Gomez, and we've been doing the show for 2.5 years. And the last time we looked, a few weeks ago, we had about 5,000 listeners. So we
That's
think
right.
that's
and you're
great.
able to determine where your listeners are coming from. What other states they're coming? They're coming from.
No, we don't have that technology yet.
Okay.
And we can't tell if you're listening to the whole show or not. We can only tell that you've tuned in and how many people have tuned in. But the show was picked up by another platform, and it's played 3 times a week. It's played live on Sunday nights, but then it's played 3 times a week in the Boston area, on a platform in the Boston area, Fall River Community Radio.
Awesome. So tell me about how does your work intersect with the executive office of the mayor of the District of Columbia and the DC City Council?
Well, you know, our basic responsibility, as outlined in the statute that created our office, was to lobby Congress for statehood and to keep the city council and the mayor's office informed about our progress. So we testify before the city council from time to time and let them know what's going on Capitol Hill. We've broadened our mandate a little bit and get involved in issues that your regular senators and representatives would get involved in, federal legislation and things like gun control and other things that affect our city. We just got a grant actually from the mayor to create a website, an educational website. So
That's great. That's great.
we work with both of them as closely as we can.
Wonderful. Well, I thank you today for joining us today, and thank you for the
absolutely.
work that you're doing on behalf of the residents of the District of Columbia.
Well,
Senator
it's
Brown.
my honor to serve. It really is.
Thank you
and
so
thank
much.
you so much for having me.
Thank you. Hello and welcome to DC Statehood Today. I am your host, Theodora Brown, and I'm excited to be joined by 3 guests in the studio. Adam Adinger, who is the chairman of the DC Cannabis Campaign, Tessa Lewis, who is a student at Georgetown Day School, and Walter DeLeon, who is a DC ANC commissioner and also a student at Catholic University. So welcome.
Glad to be here.
Disrupt DC. Tell us about Disrupt DC. Who wants to start?
It's a group we started this summer. That's main goal was to get together young kids, college and high school, around that age, to put together, kind of like do some movements, some actions to get attention and be able to help, get attention for the cause of DC statehood, because we thought that was the right way to go about it. Yeah.
And so who came up with the name Disrupt DC?
I don't know. We met together, and I think
I think it was just the result of a lot of just conversation that we were having regarding statehood. And the
So
fact
you all
that we
knew each
needed-
other before you started the organization, or you sort of had some acquaintances? How did that work?
we met because we were all at a meeting with Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, and it was a meeting for figuring out how to use the John Oliver segment on DC statehood to the advantage of those of us who are trying to, gain DC statehood. And, we liked each other's ideas, so we decided to meet. We went out for lunch and we kind of, put together the group.
That's great. So I hear you all went down to Ocean City. Tell us about Ocean City.
Well, I'm not a youth. I'm 42 years old, but I feel
You're the
it's
elder
important.
statesman of the
Well,
group.
I've been doing DC statehood activism for 20 years. I've been arrested numerous times for the cause, and I've been always wondering, why aren't the students freaking out in this town? I mean, they're looking forward to becoming 18-year-olds, and they're not going to be able to vote for a member of Congress. They're going to be expected to register for the selective service in the military, but they have no say in whether or not that military can be used. So I thought, if there are young people that want help to organize, it's the least I could do as an adult who has a car, who has, some money to help them. And so at lunch we got together and we plotted out an idea to go to Congressman Andy Harris's district in Ocean City. He's been attaching riders that are undemocratic to the DC budget. And we made a leaflet together. We did all the editing together. We organized people to go. I think all in all, it was just a couple dozen people that went, or was it less maybe? But it wasn't. It doesn't matter really. It was a dozen of us, I guess. And the most important thing was that we went and did it. And we set up DC flags right on the beach, and we went to the storefronts and it felt like, wow, this is the first thing we've done together. Let's keep doing more things together, because you can't get discouraged by the lack of movement by Congress. We have to keep fighting.
And how was that received, do you think, Walter?
I think it was well received. It had a huge impact on social media, and I think locally too. They had the Ocean City news crews out on the beach covering what they were doing. So I think it was, all in all, really effective.
Awesome. And so, Tessa, you mentioned that you're a student, and so how are you engaging other students throughout the District of Columbia in this movement?
Well, we plan on starting chapters throughout the high schools in all the parts of DC, Northeast DC, Northwest, every part. And that way we hopefully will be able to bring the kids together and be able to do bigger events.
Mm-hmm.
If we have a small amount of people, it doesn't get the same kind of, attention it needs as if we had, thousands of kids going and saying, we need this now. This is, this is our right as being an American citizen. That's what we're trying to do. And the way we're going about that is going to try to start, groups and chapters and clubs.
And so how's that work going so far?
We haven't done much work into that. That's what we're planning on doing this month. So.
And so you have some big event that you want to do to sort of, highlight the work that you're doing in terms of the student movement, the youth movement.
We were talking about something like a walkout. You mentioned a good idea would be a flash mob, things that would be fun. We had nothing set in stone, but there are things we're talking about, yeah.
Okay, great. So how do you find the other students? I mean, clearly, there's Georgetown Day as a private school. How do you get involved with the kids who are also in the public school system as well?
My school, yeah, it is a private school, so it's harder. But have connections with friends. We haven't really done much on that yet. That's like the work we're planning on doing this month. So hopefully it works out, yeah.
I think the thing is you have to network through the people you know, and they network to the people they know, and the word gets out that actually the students in the city are waking up. Maybe this spring is when we'll see the results of this work. You know, it takes time, careful building of an organization, and developing a message. People have to buy in. They have to feel like they own this event. But if there was a student walkout, just imagine it across the city, every high school. The students are walking out. It's not an excused absence. It will get the attention of the mainstream media. It will get the attention of the president, of Congress, and it will inspire adults to take action, because the youth would be leading. I have an 11-year-old daughter. She goes to public school in D.C. Can I walk out? She heard about this. She's like, I will do it. And I'm thinking, well, we haven't talked about middle schoolers, but there really is this is such an important issue to finally get equality that I think it's legitimate for high school students, middle school students to say we've had it, and we're gonna fight for our rights too.
Great. And Walter, what about college students? How do you plan to engage college students in this effort?
Sure. Well, in my first year at Catholic University, I reached out to the students of every major university in the District of Columbia, and I found that there was interest in this, in statehood. These are folks that are coming from all 50 states, from California to Florida to Maine to Vermont and to Texas, and yet they're interested in the fact that we are not a state. And many times when you tell them about the inequality issues that we face as District of Columbia residents, they're just outraged, They're outraged at the fact that we pay federal taxes and we don't get federal representation. So really, it's very easy. Once you tell students and young people about the issues we face as Washingtonians and the fact that we don't have federal representation or true control over our local affairs, to ignite some outrage. It's very easy.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank our guests for coming in and sharing with us Disrupt DC, Adam Adinger, Tessa Lewis, and Walter De Leon. Hello and welcome to DC Statehood Today show. My name is Theodora Brown and I'm serving as your host today. And I have with me as my guest Anise Jenkins, who is the Executive Director of Stand Up for Democracy in DC, Free DC. Welcome, Anise Jenkins.
Thank you so much.
That's a mouthful. Tell me more about the organization.
Our organization was founded in 1997 when the Congress basically took over all powers of the DC local democratically elected government when they stripped everything, all local powers except for parks and recreation. And this was done, a lot of people feel, in retaliation for the 4th term of former mayor and council member Marion Barry. We decided on that day of the takeover to go down to the White House fence, to get on the fence, which we knew was a violation, and be arrested in protest, to say that no matter who was elected, who was voted for, we as American citizens had the right to make these decisions.
So how many people actually joined you that day when you went to the White House for the protest?
There were about 10 who actually came, maybe 5 were arrested, but right after that the organization attracted churches, unions, schools, universities. It was a mass protest against this. And the senator who was in control of the Senate committee was Launch Faircloth. And 13 buses of DC residents went down to North Carolina to campaign for his opponent, who at that time was former Senator Edward, I've forgotten his name now, but he won. And from then we continued to protest, and it was a very, very strong coalition until the control board was run out of town.
Right. And so what are your current efforts and activities around democracy in D.C.?
Well, what we found out is a lot of people in D.C. and beyond D.C. don't know about our status. They have no idea that you have 655,000 people living in the nation's capital, in the heart of what is supposed to be the democracy of the world, that have no participation in their own Congress, who don't control their own local budget, who don't elect or appoint their own local judges. What we do is educate, basically educate. We were recently we were at the Black Caucus, and we had a booth there with materials, educational materials such as this. We talked to people.
And what exactly is that you're holding in your hand?
Well, this is called the DC Statehood Mythbusters, and it addresses a lot of things that we found out over the years, that misconceptions that people have about DC getting its rights as a state. For example, one says that they thought that DC wasn't large enough to be a state. And we answered that DC has as many people as Wyoming and Vermont, which it does, and DC is continuing to grow. There's one that's really funny that I find I would never think of, but they say, well, 51 stars on the flag would ruin the United States flag. We have a flag right here that shows 51 stars look really good on the United States flag. So it's like 10 points that we address that we call Mythbusters.
And so how is that information received, and how was your activism received during the last week, during the Congressional Black Caucus Legislative Week?
Yes, it was very positive. The thing is that we are educating, people are finding out, and mostly the response is shock. People are actually shocked. They can't believe it. We're the only country in what is called the democratic world where the capital has no representation.
And so how do you stay in touch with people that you meet in your travels, whether it's in D.C. or the surrounding jurisdictions?
Yes, we ask people to sign a petition that says, I support DC statehood. And usually there's no problem with that at all. Once you answer the questions that they ask, if they're concerned about us having the land that is the mall, the National Mall, or the White House, or the Smithsonian, we make it very clear that no, that's not. That's for everybody. That's for all Americans. We make it clear that we want to have control of our own neighborhoods, our own schools, just like every other jurisdiction has. So it's very positive. We collect these names. We include them in our database, and we stay in touch. We've done this actually we were founded in 1997, and we've been doing it for a long time.
And so have you seen a lot of success in terms of the people in the other states sort of, either contributing to your activities, or they are informing other people where they live, or they putting on programs? I mean, just sort of how does that play out?
Well, I would say that one challenge that we have is once people express their support, they go home. And they go back to their community, they go back to the neighborhood, and they might forget about us. So I remember talking to Congressman John Lewis, who was involved in the 60s and still involved in civil rights. And I said, well, what can we do? What can we do to make people remember us when they go home? And he said very bluntly, he said, you're too quiet.
So what was he advocating that you do?
He was advocating, I think, the way we started. We started with protests. We started with civil disobedience. We started with rallies. Education will lead and inspire people to act, but we have to go that next step and act to keep our situation on people's minds so that they can remember and they can help us, because they have the power and we have the power. If we work together, we can do it.
Right. And so it sounds like there's a lot of work to be done, but I love your energy, and I thank you so much for coming to the show today and sharing with us about the activities of Free DC.
Thank you so much.
I hope you found the interviews interesting. In the last segment of the show, we will take you through some history of DC statehood. I hope you find it both educational and entertaining.
With the District of Columbia Organic Act of 1801, Washington, D.C. officially came under the control of the U.S. Congress. For being part of the federal city and not of a state, former Maryland and Virginia state residents gave up their congressional representation, among other benefits afforded to state residents. For most of its history, the city's leadership was appointed by the President of the United States, and from 1874 to 1975, the city was administered by 3-member board of commissioners, also appointed by the President. It took amending the U.S. Constitution to allow citizens of Washington to vote in presidential elections. With the ratification of the 23rd Amendment on March 29, 1961, Washington, D.C. citizens were allowed to vote in presidential elections, starting with the election of 1964. And it was about 10 years later, with the enactment of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act on December 24, 1973, that D.C. citizens were allowed to elect a city mayor and a 13-member city council. In 1978, Congress passed the District of Columbia Voting Rights Amendment, which would have given the District of Columbia 2 senators and 1 representative in Congress. The proposed amendment to the Constitution failed to get the ratification by the 38 states it needed before it expired on August 22, 1985. And so today, Washingtonians find themselves at the same perils they were more than 200 years ago. Residents of the nation's capital are subject to all the obligations of state residency, like paying federal taxes and serving in the military, but don't enjoy the privileges of being a state. The only congressional representation Washington has is a non-voting delegate to the House. Laws and the budget passed by its city council are subject to congressional approval, and the residents of the city must pay federal taxes without representation.
Thank you for watching us. Remember, you can watch us online at dctv.org or dc51.us, or follow us on Twitter at dc51today. I'm Denisha Richard, and we hope to see you next time on DC Statehood Today.